This has to end, you hear me? It has to end now!
My name is Margaret Hail. I'm 63, and somewhere between the smell of lavender polish and old wood, I learned to live with quiet. I wasn't always this way, before Richard passed. Our house had a second pulse, his whistling from the study, the clink of a teaspoon against his cup, the small chorus of ordinary life. Now, the quiet lingers like a loyal dog by the door, faithful, patient, and sometimes a little too watchful. I suppose that's why I have my rituals. Rituals give shape to silence. Late autumn sunlight poured through my lace curtains at a soft angle, laying long bars of gold across the living room floorboards. I stood by the window in my navy coat, buttoning the last button, catching a faint reflection of a woman who still surprises herself by appearing older than she feels. I glanced around the room and inhaled that private blend only my house knows: polish, paper, dry lavender, and the ghost of yesterday's coffee. The clock chimed. 6, not a stern command, more like a gentle nudge. Dinner at my son Daniel's house. I could already see the table in my mind. Leela, as immaculate place settings, Daniel's proud grin when a dish turns out just right, the steam ghosting up from a casserole like it's making a speech. But first, the checklist. Anyone who lives alone understands this choreography. I clicked the front latch twice and waited for the echo. I slid the back window until it sighed into the frame. I ran my fingers over the alarm keypad, not turning it on yet, just acknowledging it, as if saying, you, too, are part of this home. I touched the edge of the picture frame on the piano, then bent and kissed Richard's smiling face. When did that become a benediction? I couldn't say grief turns gestures into prayers without asking permission. I lifted my lemon pie from the counter and cradled it like something breakable, because in a way it was. There's a tenderness in bringing food to your grown child, a way of saying I still have something to give. Outside, the air held its breath between evening and night. Porches were just beginning to light up. Somewhere a chimney worked at the edges of the sky. Peaceful. I thought the kind of evening that suggests the world is decent and orderly after all, if you look from far enough away. I locked the door, checked it with my palm, and stepped into the cool. I had no idea that when I returned, that same door would feel like it belonged to someone else. Daniel's house always feels brisk and newly minted. Leela keeps it that way. Not a coaster out of place. She was already moving between kitchen and dining room when I arrived. Her smile arranged like fresh flowers taste foo. Symmetrical, not a petal out of line. I set the pie down and hugged Daniel, who smelled like rosemary and effort. I'm testing a new recipe, he said, doing the careful son routine that still manages to be real, but he checked his phone between sentences, as if there was a second conversation happening elsewhere. I felt a small tug in my chest, the way a thread catches on a splee. Enter. I smoothed my face. Little things aren't always omens. Weed, the kind of food that makes conversation easy. Cutlery tap plates. Leela laughed at just the right places and poured water the way you pour a promise, steady, controlled. The pie sat in its tin at the center of the table, shining under the lights like a well-polished memory. I let myself lean into the warmth. Little jokes, the steady rhythm of family chatter that pretends time is harmless. You can forget a lot of things in a gentle room. Even caution loosens its scarf. My phone buzzed. On the screen, Rosa, my cleaning lady, who comes once a week and does more than dust. She notices. She remembers. She cares. I glanced at Daniel. Go ahead, Mom, he said, amused at the title that never XP. Race. I answered and time slid sideways. Mrs. Hale, Rosa whispered, as if the phone itself had to be quiet. Someone is in your house. For a heartbeat I didn't breathe. Language misfires. When you're forced to translate the impossible into the present. Tense. What do you mean? I managed. My voice thin as paper. I saw them through the kitchen window, she said. Words. stumbling in a hurry to be believed. Tall, wearing gloves, the lights were off. I thought you were home, but her breath hitched. The pie turned to metal in my mouth. I was the sort of woman who double-latched D. Whereas out of habit, not fear, I had locked everything. I know I had. But Rosa is not the kind to imagine danger where there is none. Leave now, I told her, the authority surprising both of us. Get somewhere safe. Call the police. When the call ended, the room had changed. Not its furniture or its faces, those were still behaving, but the tilt of the air, the pitch of the moment, Leela's smile dimmed. Daniel stood so fast his chair complained. What happened? He asked, the old protectiveness waking up. Someone's in my house. I said it. The words sounded free, and as if I borrowed them and wasn't sure I had the right to use them. I touched the back of Daniel's hand, a signal that I was still me. Then I stood, gathered my coat, and stepped into the kind of night that edits your assumptions. Police lights repainted my street in breeze colors, blue, red, and the black in between. Radios crackled like angry insects. Neighbors stood in little clusters, their faces flickering with concern and curiosity. My home, my dependable story of a place set inside a ring of uniforms. I still held the pie. I don't know why. Maybe it's a thing mothers do. Keep the offering intact, even when the altar has moved. Mrs. Hale, please stay behind the tape, an officer said gently. I nodded, because there are moments when obedience feels like a blanket. I watched them disappear into my rooms with measured urgency, heard the faint thud of footsteps where quiet was supposed to live. The night held its breath and counted. After a long, dissolving stretch of minutes, the officer returned. No one's inside now. He said, looks like they left in a hurry, which is the kind of sentence that's supposed to calm you. It didn't. I crossed the threshold and met the smell before I saw the mess. Dust smudged by. Gloves, the cold of disturbed air, a tinge of something not mine. Drawers were yanked open as if angered by their contents. Picture frames lay flat. Like fallen soldiers, Richard studied his safe. Little museum I'd kept unchanged was spread open and turned inside out. Not a looting for cash, a search. The television remained. The silver where it gleamed where I left it. But the small chestnut jewelry box from my dresser was gone. Richard's everyday watch, the one that kept our mornings in step, gone. A ribbon bundle of old letters from a drawer under the bed gone, too. Not valuables. Exactly. Intimacies. The logic of it made my skin go cold. Strange, one officer murmured, pin scratching the pad. Not after Mon. A or electronics. Whoever it was knew what to take. I felt my throat narrow, the way it does when memory turns to grit. I turned and caught Leela's eyes. She stood at the doorway, fingers clasped, the perfect picture of a woman properly rattled. Her gaze flicked, just once, toward the broken drawers. You okay, Leela? Daniel asked, hand on her shoulder. She offered a small smile dressed in shock, just stunned. Who would do this to Mom? I wanted to believe her. I needed to, for Daniel's sake, for mine. But the trained smoothness of her answer, the way it glided, without snagging on a single surprised syllable, something about it, felt rehearsed. I hate even writing that. It's a cruel thing to suspect goodness of pretending. When the officers finally left, and the BL, you red haze lifted, Daniel asked to stay. I'll be fine. I said, because sometimes the best way to love your child is to refuse to be the hinge he blames himself for. He kissed my cheek and promised to come early tomorrow. Leela's glance was soft and, when wrinkled by worrying, the door closed behind them with the careful click of a line being drawn. Alone, I did what widows do when the quiet bears its teeth. I put the frames upright again. I set the chairs on their feet. I listened to the clock count my breaths. Every friendly house sound floorboard whisper. Heater sigh arrived. Changed, carrying a question. Who knew where to look? And why take only the pieces that still smelled like us? I made tea and held the cup into hands until the tremor eased. I thought of the W, women on my street, who live with their own enumerations of safety, latches, lights, alarms, drapes, routes, routines. People think thieves want cash. People don't always understand that the worst ones want provenance. They want the objects that bind a life to itself. How else do you hurt what you cannot replace? I sat under the amber pool of the table lamp and looked at Richard's photo. If there is something I should see, I whispered, send me toward it. The bulb answered with a faint tick. I don't believe in messages. I believe in evidence. Still, I felt something assemble inside me, not rage, not yet, but shape. The story had turned. I could feel its spine. And tomorrow, I would start tracing the small, honest lines that lead from intrusion to identity, from violation to truth. A house doesn't stop being your home because someone crosses its threshold with bad hands. It just waits to see what you'll do next. So I waited with it, and I listened. Ned, and I promised the walls I would not be fooled by. Silence again. A house can be two places at once, the scene of a crime and the repository of everything you love. I learned that in the first hour after the officers pronounced my rooms clear. Clear is a generous word. What I saw was the geography of a search drawers forced to confess, cushions unzipped, the pale underskin of a sofa bared like a secret, the floor read like a diary no one meant to share, a smear of dust, a print where a knee had pressed, a single thread snagged at the mouth of a drawer, Richard's study. The sanctuary I'd kept like a museum exhibit was worst of all. His pen scattered, paper clips sprung free like startled minnows, a folder emptied of its patient papers. I stood there, a woman in her own cast. Raoul, watching incense replaced by fingerprint powder. Ma'am, an officer said softly, can you take a quick look and tell us what's missing? He was careful with the word quick, as if speed could protect me. I nodded. I tried to let my eyes do what my heart could not: collect, compare, decide. The television remained where I left it, smugly expensive and suddenly cheap. The laptop on the desk BL inked its standby pulse, untouched. The silver cutlery wedding gift, engraved with initials that felt too formal for our laughter, sat where it always sat, but the smell chest knew. Tea jewelry box on my dresser, the one with the hinge that squeaked in a voice Richard used to tease, was gone. The everyday watch he had wound and worn and set on the nightstand each evening gone. And deep from under the bed, where I kept a ribboned bundle of old letters, the ones that spoke in our younger voices and still smelled faintly of ink and cologne, gone, too. Strange. The officer murmured, pen moving, no cash taken, no electronics, no credit cards. Whoever this was knew what to take. He didn't say knew you. He didn't have to. The sentence hung in the room, like smoke. Grief makes routines of us. That's something widows learn. The way sailors learn currents by being carried. After a loss, you live by lists. Latch twice. Window, alarm, keys, stove, Monday linens, Tuesday floors, Saturday letters. Routines become a scaffold where the day can't collapse, but routines also publish you. They tell anyone watching where to look, when you'll be gone, which drawer shelters the small box with the fragile hinge. In neighborhoods like ours, with porches close enough to eavesdrop on each other's sunsets, the gentlest eyes can still be doors. Mom, Daniel said, standing in the doorway to the study, his voice careful, like stepping into a shallow pond that might be deeper than it looks. He wanted to be my shore. That's what good sons W. And he took a step toward me, then another, then stopped when he saw my hand hovering over the empty square of dust where the jewelry box had slept. We'll fix this, he said, and meant it, though neither of us knew what fixing would require. Leela stayed near the hall, fingers laced, face pale and perfectly composed, a portrait of appropriate distress. She kept looking not at me, but at the small violences around us, the overturned frame. With our anniversary photo, the drawer yanked so hard its runners groaned, the spilled paper clips, and I watched her watching. Once, her eyes naked on a splintered drawer that had held the letters. It was a 2-second glance, but in those 2 seconds something in me took a step back from her, like a tide deciding where the beach ends. An officer asked me to sit and talk through a standard sequence of questions when I left. Who knew I would be out? Any recent contractors, deliveries, visitors? The litany was almost soothing in its predictability. I answered carefully, feeling as if language had suddenly become evidence, not just air. "My cleaning lady, Rosa," I said. She called. I did. And say she cares about me in a way that makes the word lady too small. My son, of course. I didn't say he checks his phone too often. My daughter-in-law. I didn't say her smile sometimes law. Ideas before the feeling that should carry it. The officers dusted and lifted and taped and labeled, moving through my rooms like archivists in a history they hadn't lived. Blue powder breath onto wood, onto glass, onto the past. They told me what they tell so many seniors in neighborhoods like mine, that most residential burglars go for quick convert items, cash, cards, electronics, 15 minutes in and out, straight. HT lines, simple maps. This wasn't that. This was a careful reading, in the quiet epidemic no one likes to name, the one where older people are targeted not by strangers with crowbars, but by familiarity with keys, faces, and rhythms. The theft isn't of property so much as provenance. Take the watch and you don't steal time, you steal the history that watch kept. Take the letters and you don't erase words, you erase the ritual of rereading the best ones on bad Wednesdays. Tell us if you remember anything else, the officer said. Memory's a funny thing. After something like this, he meant it kindly. Trauma can turn a steel trap mine into a colander, but my memory wasn't full of holes. It was crowded with connections. They left after midnight, the tapealoo. Yellow ribbon around the porch, the house breathing. Different air. Daniel lingered, asking again if he could stay. I touched his cheek and said the sentence mothers deploy when they need their children to sleep without seeing the monsters. I'll be fine. He looked like the boy who used to run to me with scraped knees, jaw tight with "I'm okay," and "I thou." GT how parenthood flips itself over and becomes a mirror. Leela hugged me lightly. Carefully, her perfume wristband said, "We'll come in the morning." She didn't say I'm sorry about the watch. She aged. He didn't have to. That's the trick with politeness. It always sounds like apology from a distance. When the door clicked shut behind them, the house exhaled. The quiet returned, taller than before. I stood in the living room, the amp casting a warm cone of light, and looked around at the new map of my belongings. Fingerprint powder, that soft underworld blue, clung to the edges of my life like something Sky had dropped and Ford oughtn't to collect. I knelt to lift a frame and found myself studying Richard's face the way a detective studies a witness. What are you trying to tell me that you don't know how to say? I gathered the fallen, not to erase the record of what had happened, but to insist the record include my refusal to be reduced. One by one, I righted chairs, nested drawers, brushed powder into pan. The broom made a hush-hush sound that, for a moment, sounded like forgiveness. I made tea and drank it with both hands around the mug, a small act of containment. On the table, I placed a notepad and began a different kind of list. Not the widow's checklist of latches and windows, but a ledger of absence. Watch, box, letters, the verbs that should follow each of those nouns. Tick, keep, remember had been interrupted. I added a new line. Why these? I added another. Who knew? And then a third. What will I do? The page didn't answer, but it seemed to lean closer. I lay in bed later with the lamp on, as if illumination could guard the edges of sleep. The floorboard at the foot of the bed made its usual winter complaint, and yet I heard it as new a word pronounced with a foreign accent. I turned on my side and looked at the rectangle of darker shadow where the letters had been. I had hidden them well, I thought. But someone had known better. If you ask me what broke my heart that first night, it wasn't the mess. The powder, the ruined serenity, it was the precision. The way violation became choreography, the way someone had taken the time to learn my time. T. Hassle wound you recognize by its shape. Before I turned off the lamp, I told the room a truth out loud. The way you say a diagnosis to make it real. This was not random. The house listened. I listened back. The silence was no longer empty, it was an archive. And in the morning, I would start reading it properly. For now, I let the light burn a little longer and kept walk. With what was left. Morning arrived like a measured verdict. Light across the kitchen table, the kettle's steady exhale, the small ceremony of putting a cup in the same spot I always do. The house had settled in the night, as houses do after commotion, but a new tension lived in the corners, a tautness you sense rather than see. I washed my hands, not because they were dirty, but because the ritual of a clean slate is sometimes the only slate you can find. Outside, the street was itself dog walkers, a jogger, the mail truck murdering through, but the world's ordinary. Felt almost indecent against the private disarray of my rooms. By the just my name in a hand I did not recognize, written in the kind of ink that means to be anonymous. The envelope's weight was wrong tea, all purposeful. I carried it to the table like a piece of glass. Inside was Richard's watch, the one that had vanished from my nightstand, his watch that knew our mornings by heart. It lay in my palm, with the intimacy of an old habit. Beneath it, a photograph. The image was clean and confident, taken at some bright party, where laughter is part of the decor. Leela smiled at the camera. Leela, with the pearl necklace I'd inherited from my mother bright around her throat. My pearls, the background was a honey blur of expensive cheer. The foreground was certainty. My body understood before my mind did. The breath left, the world tilted. The chair caught me. It's a particular fracture, the one you can only sustain from inside your own family. Your bones stay whole. It's the invisible architecture that cracks the scaffolding of trust. The quiet contract that says we guard one another's tender things. I looked from the watch to the photo to the watch again, as if triangulate. Ion could change the angle of truth. Then I did what you do. When your life turns documentary, I took another photo of the photo. I wrote down the time, the date, the envelope's condition, evidences. A kind of mercy, it keeps you from bargaining with reality. 10 minutes later, I was in my car, the envelope, and all it contained riding shotgun. Daniel's face opened when he saw me at the door. Mom, his voice was a sentence that didn't know how to end. Leela wasn't there. Work, he said, eyes searching mine for an emergency he could fix with the right tool. At the kitchen island, I placed the watch on a paper towel, absurdly worried about scratching it. Even now, I slid the photograph across the marble until it faced him. Look, I said, and the word came out softer than I Washington. Tid, he picked it up, and I watched him have the same to second. Maybe it's edited. People can do anything with photos now. He was not wrong. Technology has made lives photogenic, but some lives ain't. It'll have tells, shadows, reflections, the way a string of pearls sits against a specific collarbone. Daniel, I said, as gently as I could, your father's watch came with this. It arrived. In my mailbox with no stamp, which means someone delivered it by hand. Someone wants me to know something. I didn't say someone wants to drive a wedge between us. I didn't say wedges are easier to age. Amber, once a crack exists. He dragged a hand through his hair. A gesture from childhood, the one that always meant I want to believe the best and it's getting hard. Mom, he said carefully, you're grieving. People play tricks. Maybe someone is trying to hurt you or us. His eyes were begging for an alternate narrator. I loved him so much for that. I could have drowned in it. What I heard beneath his words was this: please let her be innocent. Please let the world be a place where the woman I chose would never smile in a stolen necklace. The heart has its own chain of custody, and it is stubborn. I'm not asking you to accuse her, I said. I'm asking you to look with me. He nodded. which was not consent so much as a truce. Back home, I laid the watch on a cloth and listened to it not tick. It needed winding, as grief does. I thought of how many older women I know live somewhere between vigilance and apology, careful not to be a bother, careful to be careful. There, as a statistic I once read in a community newsletter, a small print paragraph you might miss between recipes and lawn announcements. A significant percentage of crimes against seniors aren't smash and grab, but familiarity-based access crimes, rhythm crimes, trust crimes. The perpetrators are not strangers who learn your window. They are acquaintances who learn your life. If you wonder whether that thought made me cynical, it didn't. It made me precise. Cynicism is a fog, precision is a lamp. That evening, I spread a legal pad on the table and began the old librarian's work of organizing what was knowable. Column A, items taken. Column B, items returned. Column C, who had knowledge of either. The watch had one audience, Richard and me, then later Daniel as boy and man. The tug of war over the bathroom mirror. The shaving cream mustaches. The letters had nearly none, only my hands, and the drawer under the bed. The necklace had two histories. My mother's, then mine, last worn on the night of Daniel and Leela's engagement party. In photographs from that night, Leela had tried the pearls on while we took group pictures, and I, soft with champagne, and love, had said, one day, the word came back now. Like a joke told backwards, I drove to Daniel's again, this time with a different plan. When Leela opened the door, she wore the kind of perfume that walks into a room half a minute ahead of its owner. She was gracious and surprised and just the right amount of worried. I asked if she'd sit with me a moment without Daniel. She said, oh. Of course, the syllables spilling like glass beads. In the living room, I set the photograph on the coffee table without preamble. I watched it register in her eyes, the flicker of inventoria, cat locker recognizing provenance. Then, because the part of me that is mother and teacher still lives, I asked a simple question. Where did you wear this? She looked at me for a long second, and in that second I saw a rehearsal collapse. It's not what it looks like, she said, a sentence that belongs in a play. The room seemed to lean in. Say more, I offered, as if she were a student and I were grading clarity. She told a story about a styled shoot, a friend's party, a vintage rental that looked just like mine, coincidences piling politely on top of one another. The story was tidy and frictionless. Life rarely is. Leela, I said, and I was surprised to hear my own kindness intact. If this is a misunderstanding, we can clear it up quickly. Her face arranged itself into gratitude. Of course, she said. Ask anything. Good, I said. Then I'll ask for time and space to look without interference. And if someone returns anything else that belongs to me, I'll bring it straight here. Her eyes flashed at the word returns. It was small, but it was there the way a car's paint flashes under certain light to reveal a previous color. On the drive home, I decided something important. I would not use more words. Words can be moved around like furniture until you forget a room's original shape. I needed furniture no one could lift, so I went to a small electronics shop at the edge of town where the clerk knows the difference between curiosity and necessity, and I bought two discreet cameras thumb size and patient. I installed one in the hallway, one in the living room, high in the corners where no one ever looks, and where light meets shadow like a handshake. Then I practiced a role I never wanted, the F, or jetful widow. I called Daniel the next afternoon and let my voice tremble a little. I might pop over to Mrs. Turner's tomorrow, dear, I said, as if confiding a mild mischief. Lines probably forget to set the alarm again. I'm hopeless these days. I put the phone on speaker. Leela was in the kitchen, and I wanted the information to travel the way such information travels, casually, as if it were nothing at all. Mom, please don't forget, Daniel said, half laughing, and in the background I heard a spoon tap a cup, the bright ring of a household trying hard to be ordinary. Leela said nothing, but silence is also an answer if you let it be. That evening I wrote one more line on my pad, under these. And who knew? It read, when the truth doesn't knock, invite it. Then I set the house the way a stage manager sets a stage, and I waited for the next act. If you've spent a career among card catalogs and archival boxes, you learn to respect the patience of editing. You also learn theater quiet, factual theater. Archivists don't announce, they arrange. That morning, I set a small china pot on a tray, 2 cups, lemon slices fanned with librarian precision, and a plate of butter cookies that look more hospitable than they taste. Hospitality is often the first sound in a symphony that ends with truth. On the hallway table, beneath the bullway, where I keep my keys, the new camera watched the front door with the unblinking courtesy of a librarian at closing time. Its twin in the living room took in the whole stage, sofa, sideboard, the drawer. That had once held letters, the tidy spill of daylight that made everything look more innocent than it was. I called Leela mid-morning. I made my voice warm and woolen. Tea today? I asked. I could use company. I find myself forgetting silly things lately. I left the sentence trailing, as if I were embarrassed by its smallness. Of course, Mom, she said, brighten. The immediate, the way a door answers the bell if it's been waiting. 2 o'clock. Perfect, I said, and hung up before my composure could overstay its welcome. At 1:30, I walk through my house the way a director walks through a set before the audience comes in. I check sight lines, from the sofa to the living room camera's tiny eye, from the hall to the way the front door mirrors a visitor's face in the glass. I nudged a lamp an inch to the left. I placed a folded throw on the arm of the couch. Soft things make even hard conversations sit down. Then I opened a drawer and laid a decoy. Not jewelry, not letters, but a small velvet pouch with a few inexpensive beads inside. I didn't want theft. I wanted tells. People's eyes go where their stories live. At 2 exactly, Leela's car slid into the curb, reliable as a calendar notification. She came in on a breeze of perfume and concern. If you have never watched someone wearing sincerity like couture, it is a particular workmanship too. See, she hugged me light, careful, and her cheek was cool against mine. How are you feeling today? She asked, then glanced past my shoulder, just for a breath, toward the hallway. Not Ed, I'm managing, I said, leading her to the living room. The police were kind. They think it was someone who knew where to look. I let that sentence hang like a coat on a chair. We sat. The tea made its civilized sounds the lid of the pot. The clink of a spoon, the gentle water fall into cups. I offered lemon. She declined and crossed her legs, ankle just brushing the rug's edge. The camera above her regarded us both with a patience that I envied. We did the kind talk first. I asked about work. She designs vintage-inspired pieces, a phrase that sounds like an Apollo. Gee for wanting old things to be new again. She talked about a collaboration, about influencers who prefer borrowed jewelry to borrowed opinions, about the cost of silver and the price of attention. I listened for the music under the melody, for the strain or swagger a practice life can't quite eliminate. Then I let a tremor into my hand, a small, well-rehearsed quiver when I set my cup down. I do worrying about the alarm, I said, not looking at the hall. I keep meaning to set it at night. Sometimes I forget. It's silly, there are only a few moments in any conversation when the molecule of truth changes state liquid to solid, vapor to visible. Her eyes, which had been soft and present, flicked right, then left, then stilled again on my face. The space between flick and still is where intention leaks. Oh, Mom, she said, smile firming. You must set it. It's not silly. She reached and touched my hand, a tableau of care. Her fingers were cool, her nails immaculate. Late, when she withdrew her hand, she smoothed her skirt. A self-soothing gesture, and the fabric whispered like a confidence. I changed the subject. We reminisce. we pretended the word necklace was not stationed like a soldier at the border of our talk. At one point, she asked for the bathroom, and I directed her down the hall. I watched the camera in my mind watch her go. Some part of me hoped to see nothing at all when she returned. Her brightness reassembled by the doorway, we resumed our tea. She made kind offers, grocery runs, helping me organize, lending me a home security contact everyone is using. It all sounded helpful, and none of it landed as help. The visit ended with a soft double kiss in the air, a European gesture imported to domestic politics, and she left with the sun still courteous in the sky. I exhaled. I poured the cold tea down the sink and stood with my hands braced on the counter the way you do when you're trying to keep from picking up something you can't set down again. Then I did pick something up. My phone. I opened the camera app Habitan saw superimposed on my reflection the pause video thumbnail from the hallway camera. The tech store clerk had been right. The app was idiot-proof, which is the compliment people pay technologies that can forgive human error. I rewound 10 minutes and watched the door open. NS, Leela enters. We embrace in the thresholds. Frame, timestamp detail carries its own gravity. We sit. The living room camera sees in painterly terms. The afternoon's light soften. Dust down. Oh, it's orbiting like benign planets. My face at a modest angle. Leela's profile calm, composed. Then, the hallway clip. Leela passes on her way to the bathroom. She does not touch the console. E-table. She does not glance at the alarm keypad. She does, however, slow half a step by the bowl of keys, and that half step is a language I don't speak but understand. She continues. In the bathroom's edge of frame mirror, a sliver of her face shows. And for a second, one curious second, there is no expression at all. A rest state, an unmasked neutral. It is not guilty. It is not innocent. It is only someone between roles. I close the app and put the phone down. I had not trapped a thief. I had captured theater. But theater studied teaches you where the exits are. That night, I called Daniel. I put him on speaker, loud enough to carry 2 kitchen tiles. I'm invited to Mrs. Turner's tomorrow, I said, letting coziness cloud precision. She insists I stay law. Tay, she's lonely. You know how she is. I laughed. The kind of laugh that suggests all the locks in the world are overkill on a good street. I'll probably forget the alarm again. You know me, Mom. Daniel said, affectionate and exasperated. I'll swing by after work and double-check everything. In the background, cupboard doors, a pan set down, the clatter of dinner being made for 2. Leela's voice did not enter the frame of sound. Sometimes absence is a more obedient witness than presence. After we hung up, I set the house. Not a trap. I am not a hunter. A thesis. The porch light off. The living room clean as a showroom. The decoy pouch now in the familiar drawer. The one a person goes to if they have been in this room before. The cameras were quiet as breath. I wrote a few more lines in the ledger on my table. If someone thinks you are forgetful, they may forget to be careful. If someone believes your home is an unlocked story, they will skip to their favorite chapter. If someone has mistaken your kindness for blindness, they will keep mistaking. Then I did something that doesn't look like strategy, but is. I slept. Not well, but with intent the way a so. Well, dear, rests on the handle of a shovel. I slept because vigilance without rest is just panic in a better outfit. Morning obeyed. Afternoon obliged. Evening arrived on time, with its long shadows and its quiet bargain. I parked at the far end of my street with the engine off and my phone face down on my thigh, the cameras conniving with the desk on my behalf. Somewhere, a dog barked. Somewhere else, a television laughed. My house gathered night to itself like a shawl. At 9:37 p.m., a light nudged on in the living room brief, then steady, the way a confession tested its own voice. My breath D and catch, it counted in the second between stillness and Motion. I remembered what I told myself. Not random. And then, across the glass of my side mirror, a figure moved through my window's reflection. Familiar height. Familiar economy of gesture. A flashlight's small circle finding exactly what it came to find. I lifted my phone, tapped the screen, and watched Truth begin to write its elfin pixels. There is a silence particular to surveillance, not the absence of sound, but the presence of attention. Sitting in my car with the engine dead and the streetlight thinning itself AC across the windshield, I felt that silence seat itself beside me like an old friend who has finally decided to tell the truth. The living room camera streamed to my phone in its usual way. No drama, just time with a good memory. The hallway camera kept its visual near the front door. And my own eyes, from the edge of the block where shadows felt welcome, watched the window. WS right, their soft glimmer of light and dark. At 9:37 p.m., the living room lamp bloomed. The picture on my phone sharpened, a narrow cone of light across the rug, the sideboard's polish. Slope, the drawer that used to cradle letters now a mouth. Waiting to be read, then the hallway feet caught motion, the door's careful open, a body slipping into the house the way someone slips into a borrowed coat already knowing the pockets. The figure wore black, as if darkness needed uniforming, and gloves, as if touch itself were evidence. The flashlight swung its small, precise move, and across objects that never expected to be interrogated. I did not gasp. Shock had already had its innings. What I felt was something cleaner, recognition, the way you can know a person by their economy of gesture, the tidy hinge of a wrist, the purposeful angle of a shoulder. Familiarity is an X-ray. You don't need the whole body to know the bones on the screen. The intruder mode. Then without trial and error, which is how amateurs betray themselves, the hall table received only a glance. The alarm keypad got the sort of look you give a dull book you've already pretended to read. Straight to the living room, straight to the drawer. No rummage, no improvised curiosity, only a practiced hand and the calm of someone who expects the house to be as compliant as last time. IF. Eldest steadying of the floor under my ribs. Some truths arrive as relief even as they arrive as ruin. This was not random, it was ritual. The intruder crouched, the camera patient as winter. Watched the gloved fingers test the drawer, then slide it open to the stop. The flashlight skimmed the contents like a bored teacher grading an easy paper. The velvet decoy pouch lay where I had placed it, soft as concession. The fingers lifted it, weighted in a quick calculation of value, and wrist then slipped it into a pocket. A pause, a look around that register, aired only as habit. The body rose, turned with a confidence I recognized from other rooms, other dinners, other afternoons of well-arranged civility. I recorded the feed to my phone because there are moments when you must become your own stenographer. Pixel by pixel, the house testified. Pixel by pixel, my heart learned a new math. Add what you know to what you can prove. Subtract the lies you wish were true. Divide what remains by courage. Outside, the street kept pretending it was just any night televisions talking to their furniture, a car easing past, the wind idling through tea. He hedged. Inside, my house demonstrated how easily intimacy can be choreographed into access. Later, when I read properly about crimes against older adults, I would see the numbers, how often he perpetrator is not a stranger with a crowbar, but someone with a calendar. How insider targeting has a higher yield for thieves because it bypasses locks and learns schedules. I would let on the language, undue influence, access crimes, trust exploitation. I would clip the sentences where researchers point out that the most stolen things are the ones that will never show up on a paw. And sheet documents, heirlooms, the small reliquaries we use to keep ourselves attached to ourselves. But in that moment, I didn't need the literature review. I had the literature when the figure left quick, contained, not running, because running is loud. The hallway camera signed the exit with a small change in light. and then returned to stillness. I stayed where I was and let the stillness finish its thought. Even victory needs a minute too. Close its eyes. Back in the house, I greeted the emptiness like a host greeting the last guest, politely, with a mind already moving to clean up. I locked the door, then set both phones side by side. On the table, the one that had watched, and the one that had recorded the watching. The images were not ambiguous. The face wasn't masked. The posture was practically a signature. I rewound once, twice, not to savor but to ensure. No misread angles, no trick of light, no coincidental twin. Then, and only then, I let my hand shake. I am not naive about human beings. Librarianship makes pragmatist of us all. For every book you shelve, you understand there were 3 the patron intended to read and didn't. For every volume served, there are dozens lost to damp basements. Moving day haste, the small neglects that end in large vanishings. People are like that who meant well, didn't manage, swore a promise, misplaced it, loved, but loved themselves more. Still, the specific cruelty of stealing memory of choosing the objects that carry an entire weather system of a life requires a species of cold eye. Have never learned to live with. I made notes, time stamps, angles, a list of what I suspected now lay in someone else's drawer. The decoy beads would be a footnote I could live with. The letters I could not. The watch had returned to me by a proxy hand. A messenger with no name. The pearls had surfaced in a photograph that looked like a magazine ad for carelessness. The letters would be the altar I refused to let anyone burn. If I could save nothing else, I would save our language. By morning, the fear had been replaced by intention. Not bravado, just honest work. I brewed coffee strong enough to discipline a thought and open the app again. This time exporting the clips to a little drive the electronics clerk had insisted I take. Paranoid, he joked kindly, is just a synonym for backed up. I labeled the files with the plainness of a person who expects to show her homework. Date_living_room.mp4 date_hallway.mp4. I placed the drive in a jar of rice in the pantry, then laughed at myself and moved it to a safer, less culinary place. Paranoia, it turns out, is a muscle you can overwork. On my illegal pad, I drew 2 columns, evidence and consequence. Under evidence, I wrote footage, prior meal, pattern of items taken. Familiarity of movement, Leela's glance at the drawer. The way Daniel's phone has been busy with someone else's emergency. Under con. Sequence, I didn't write police. Not yet. This wasn't a moral high ground performance, it was a calculus. If I filed a report now, the truth might become a public spectacle, and Daniel would be asked to occupy a witness stand built between his wife and his mother. I chose a different architecture, a private tribunal, staged fairly, with no room for deniability to hide behind furniture. That afternoon, I called Daniel and invited them both to dinner. Roast chicken, I said, and he made the pleased sound men make when a childhood memory rings the dinner bell. I polished the crystal. I ironed the linen napkins that live in the drawer with the birthday candles and the stubborn belief that occasions matter. I set the table the way you lay out a mat when you're about to correct a knave. Ignor's error, clearly, kindly, with the root highlighted before they arrived. I cued the footage on the television, then blanked the screen. I put the remote where my hand could find it. Why? Thought looking, I placed the pearl's photograph in an envelope by my plate, not to wield like a weapon, but to hold like a proof. And on the sideboard, quiet and dignified, I set Richard's watch wound ticking, keeping us honest. Dinner was good because I am good at dinners. People talk better when the food is warm and the table is beautiful. We ate, and they smiled, and Leela told a story. Hat tried on humor and found it fit. Daniel relaxed. That was crucial. You can't ask a heart to see through fog and panic both. Let the fog lift first. When the plates were cleared and the candle had found its last steady inch of flame, I said, I'd like to show you something. I said it the way a librarian says, I have the document you requested. I picked up the remote. The screen filled with my living room, this living room on a different night. The lamps bloom, the drawers reveal the familiar body moving in a way I can no longer call graceful. In the side glow of the television, Daniel's face drained, then flush, then found no color at all. Leela's jaw did the thing a jaw does when it can't decide between apology and defense and chooses neither. I didn't speak. Evidence prefers silence at first presentation. When the footage ended, I let the room sit inside itself for 10 seconds. 10 honest seconds can do more than an hour of argument. Then I turned to the person who had taken my letters and my pearls, and now had to decide if the rest of our lives would be written in ink or erasure. Leela, I said, and let her name be both invitation and mirror. I have always believed that truth prefers a well-set table. The screen went dark, and all that remained was the little sound a candle makes when the wick surrenders an almost inaudible ACI. Chi of smoke. Daniel's hands were flat on the tablecloth the way a man holds the earth when he's worried about falling off it. Leela stared at the blank TV as if another ending might volume untear itself if she waited politely. Leela, I said again, an invitation to step into the open. Names can be doorways or mirrors. Tonight I offered both. She inhaled, found her, poised like a clasp, and fastened it. That isn't what it looks like. She began, words lifting like birds startled into flight. I went by to check on the house because you've been so forgetful. I wanted to make sure things were safe. The pouch or her eyes flicked to my hands, calculating what I knew and how precisely. I thought it was mine. The light your light made the colors look alike. And the keys Daniel has a spare, you know that. If I wanted to steal, she stopped, recognizing the wrongness of that road. Evidence sat between us the way a judge sits, potty. ENT, unimpressed by performance. I didn't raise my voice or lower it. I let it live where it always lives, in the middle register that has gotten me through grief and grocery lists. You bypassed the alarm. I said it was off. She replied too quickly. You moved like someone who expected it to be. I said, straight to the right drawer. No checking the kitchen. No calling my name to be sure I wasn't home. You knew the topography. Daniel made a sound then, small and wounded, and for a second I wanted to wrap him in my arms and send us all back to before. Before watches and mailboxes and pearls and photographs in the particular chill of being narrated by your own security camera. But love without boundaries is not love. It's appetite. I held my seat. Why the letters? I asked softly. Why the watch? Why the necklace that belonged to my mother? The questions were not knives, they were keys. Her face, so capable of arranging itself into occasion-appropriate expressions, faltered. I didn't know the sentence starved on its way out. The letters, I thought you didn't need them. You have the memories. That, I said, in surprise, at myself with the steadiness in my voice, is not your sentence to write. Daniel lifted his eyes to her. He has his father's eyes when they're hurt, lit from beneath by a stand kindness. Leela, he said, and his voice broke like a branch under ice. Tell the truth. She tried a final costume, indignation. So you both set me up, cameras. Pretending to forget the alarm, I came to help. I was worried about you, Margaret. Your routines, your rituals there. Sweet. But they leave you open. Someone needed to manage things. Someone who understands. Assets. The words slid into the roomlet. The occult coin, in families like ours, that word has a way of dressing itself as responsibility when it is, in fact, appetite in a blazer. I thought of the articles I read since the break-in, the law, and gauge around undue influence, the graphs that show how women over 60 are disproportionately targeted by people they trust. How exploitation often borrows the vocabulary of care, protect, simplify, stir, hemline while it disassembles a life into Salvageable parts. I slid the photograph across the table, the one where the pearls made a small moon around her throat. A faint flush rose along her cheekbones. Pride, not shame, style shoot. She repeated, but even she seemed bored with the narrative now. Leela, Daniel said, and it was not a question anymore. Give me the keys to my mother's house. There is a tone only the betray. Own, it is not loud. It is not even angry. It is the sound of a hinge deciding it will no longer carry a door. She held his gaze, then rang it. Ched slowly into her purse. The keys came out with a damp clink. She placed them near his plate, not touching the linen, as if the tablecloth could catch what fell from her hands. Get out, he said quietly. Just go, for a heartbeat. Her face emptied now. Roll to play, no audience to 10. Then she stood, smoothed her skirt, and lifted her chin. The woman who traded elegance for access was elegant. Again, she left without slamming the door. Thieves don't slam doors. They make exits that suggest they were never there. Silence recalibrated the room. The candle had finally died. The CL. Akin the hall audition as metronome for the next part of our lives. Daniel bent forward and pressed his palms to his eyes, a boy's gesture borrowed by a grown man. I went to him, Adele, asked, and he came to me, the way children come to water. He cried the way decent men cry when their ideal self collides with their real circumstances. Briefly, privately, with apology even in the grief. I'm sorry, he kept saying into my shoulder, as if the word could retroactively become a guardrail. I'm so sorry. Mom, you didn't do this. I told him, stroking the back of his head as if the boy with scraped knees had never left the room. But you will help me repair it. And he did. In the weeks that followed, he changed the locks, reset the alarm, added a camera to the back entry, and learned the uneasy choreography of co-parenting. A house with his mother. He called the credit bureaus, checked my accounts, placed alerts that would ring louder than politeness. He ordered a small safe, bolted it into the closet floor, and placed inside not my valuables. The television, even newly purchased, would remain in the living room like an obedient dog, but my histo, the letters, the watch, the small box where grief sometimes sleeps. Neighbors know before they're told. Whispers work faster than Wi-Fi. Mrs. Turner appeared with a bundt cake and the kind of hug people save for funerals. Mr. Kaplan across the street offered to trim my hedges until things calmed down, which is male code for I need to do something with my hands, so I don. Tea cry about how the world treats good women. Rosa came by and held my cheeks in her hands. Do you feel safer now, Mrs. Hail? She asked, a prayer braided with a question. Safer, I said, and clearer. Safety is a moving target. Clarity is a place you can stand. The story traveled without my help, as stories do in neighborhoods that still pretend they are villages. Did you hear? T was the daughter-in-law. Can you imagine? Always thought she was a bit polished. Gossip is a blunt instrument and I didn't need it. But somewhere inside the chatter was an exhale I could live with. The communal relief that the threat was not random. That it did not float. That it had a name and a face, and would not be making the rounds at dusk. Daniel apologized until the apology softened. From penance into practice. He showed up on Wednesdays to take out the bins and on Sundays to repair whatever small thing had lost its courage. He learned how to set the alarm, and then stayed at the door until he heard it arm itself one beat, then another, the quiet duet of renewed boundaries. Sometimes we ate dinner with the television off and the window open, the kind of ordinary meal. That teaches the body to trust the room again. As for the police, I did not summon them with my footage. Not because I feared the process, but because I understood the consequence. A report W. I'll assemble a public narrative that would require Daniel to choose between dignity and spectacle. The footage had been enough for the tribunal that mattered. Our table, our history, our promise to remain a family without lying about what had tried to ruin it. That said, I copied the files to a drive, labeled them, and left them with my attorney, along with a written account of the eve. Hence, if I die, I told him with a smile that made him frown, this will be the most exciting footnote in my estate plan. Documentation is not vengeance, it's stewardship. One afternoon, I wound Richard's watch and held it to my ear. Tick, tick, time. Insistent and civil, proceeding without permission from any of us. I placed it on the sideboard where the son could visit it briefly each day. The Leela in the garden opened and closed life. Disciplined hearts. I watered them and thought how so much of human decency is just maintenance. Check the locks, return the calls, tell the truth, keep the proof, forgive what doesn't require you to. Be foolish. A week after the dinner, Rosa asked again, softer this time. Do you feel safe, Mrs. Hail? I looked at my house. The repair drawer, the new locks, the camera small patience. The ordinary clutter of a life that refuses to be curated into someone else's convenience. Safer, I said, because peace isn't. The absence of betrayal, it's the courage to face it and then keep living exactly where it tried to stop you. The evening light moved across the floor, faithful to its route. I stood in it, not as a woman, and conquered by fear, but as a woman who now understood the map. The story had punished me for being gentle. I chose not to punish myself for having been so. Kindness is not the error, misreading the cost I. S. I set the table for two, just Daniel, and me and let the house, at last, be a house again, for walls, a roof, a history, and a new promise that every entry would be honest or not at all. Mornings are honest in a way people sometimes aren't. They arrive without alibi, step onto the kitchen tile with bare feet, and tell you what the day will be made of. Light, heat, a handful of work, and the quiet courage required to inhabit your own rooms. In the weeks after the dinner, I learned to greet morning not as a verdict, but as a companion. I wound Richard's watch and listened for the small insistence of tick, tick, as if time itself were teaching me how to put one foot in front of the other. The house learned me again, and I learned it how the new lock clicks, how the camera hums an inaudible promise, how the drawer slides without complaint because Daniel sanded the track smooth. Repair, I discovered, is a kind of love, specific, patient, measurable. I watered the Lee, lies Richard planted years ago, pressed soil around their ankles, and thought about the arithmetic of trust. Everyone wants trust to be a gift you give once and forever. It isn't. It's a ledger that needs balancing, a muscle that remembers both the stretch and the strain. In the quietest hours, I still reached for the letters that had been taken, the ones that carried our earlier voices, our first drafts of vows we kept and broke and kept again. Their absence hurt like a tooth that's no longer there. Your tongue still seeks it, still aches around the shape of what was, but grief, I've learned, doesn't mean you stop gardening. It means you plant what will bloom in the soil that remains. Neighbors resumed their walks past my porch and traded the kind of nod that says more. The language, Rosa brought fresh cloths and a new bottle of lavender polish and, without fanfare, returned some part of my ritual to me. We worked in companionable silence until she finally asked, "Do you feel at peace now, Mrs. Hail?" The question didn't feel like it was testing me. It felt like it was blessing me. I feel right-sized, I said, surprising myself, not invulnerable, not broken, just proportionate to my life. Again, she nodded as if we had just solved a small problem of physics. On a bright Tuesday, a plain envelope appeared in my mailbox and, oh, stamp, no return address, just my name, written as if the pen were trying to apologize for being involved. Inside, a single photograph, a close-up of a dresser drawer, my old letters stacked like a deck of pale cards, and a handwritten note on the back. I recognized the handwriting not by its loops, but by its effort to be neat. I didn't read them. It said, "I promise." A lie, probably, or maybe a hope, but along with the photograph came a smaller envelope, fat with what it could carry, 3 letters, not all. The earliest ones, from our lean years, they smelled faintly of the pasting. Paper? The laugh we wrote with when we were still learning what marriage would require. I sat at the table and read one out loud to the empty room, as if it were a psalm. When I finished, I placed the envelope in the safe and locked it. The click a small almond. I didn't call Daniel to tell him about the meal. You learn, with grown children, that not every new fact needs tea. It'll be a new conversation. He was already doing the work good man does after his heart has been given a better map. He called me from the hardware store to ask about door sweeps, and from the grocery to ask about lemons. He stopped arriving with apologies and began arriving with dinner, with tasks, with jokes whose only job was to make the evening lighter. Our piece did not perform itself, it practiced. On a Sunday, I set to plates and we ate under a window that breathed the last of August into the room. Daniel rinsed dishes while I dried, a choreography older than either of us, and then we with coffee at the table where Trick had recently presided. He looked at the watch on the sideboard, and then at me. You know, he said, I keep thinking about the footage, Abo, at how come she looked. I should have by put a hand over his. You should have loved your wife, I said, which you did. And when the truth arrived, you should have loved your mother, which you do. There aren't bonus points for predicting the plot. He laughed, short and rueful, and then leaned back. You always make it sound simple. No, I said, smiling, I make it so. And survivable. He reached into his pocket and placed something on the table. A small key, unfamiliar, a safety deposit box, he said. For copies of the footage and your documents, belt and suspenders. This is how men apologize when the words have already been spent. They build you a belt and bring you suspenders, and you wear both because redundancy is another way love says I won't fail you if one thing be Ari. AKS, if you want to know whether I ever called the police, here is the answer I can live with. I left the record where records belong. My attorney holds the footage and the written account labeled and aided, not to threaten, but to anchor the truth if it drifts. Justice isn't always a courtroom. Sometimes it's a kitchen with a working lock, a son with a spare key you asked him to keep. Anyway, a safe that closes with a civilized hush. Some evenings I sit on the porch with a book and read for an hour without turning the page. It isn't the story on paper that holds me. It's the story the house tells how dust finds the old paint on it, how the porch light makes a halo of the ordinary. I have visitors again, Mrs. Turner, with gossip she claims not to like very much. Enjoys. Mr. Kaplan with overripe tomatoes. Rosa with a new joke she can't get through without laughing. I say yes to dinners and no to anything that sounds like caretaking I didn't. T asks for boundaries, it turns out, are not walls. They are invitations with names on them. As for Leela, time took her away in the polite way time does no fanfare, just fewer appearances at the edges of our days, fewer of her things in Daniel's photographs, until one afternoon he told me, simply, that they were separating. He didn't disparage her. He didn't ask me to gloat with him. He only asked if I could come over to help pack the kitchen. We wrapped the plates in paper and our silence in kindness. Some love stories end before the credits. That doesn't mean you have to. Boo the actors when the lights come up. What remains is not triumph, it is steadiness. The camera is still there, a small eye that blinks into updates every few months. The lock still clicks like at you. Understands it wasn't always trusted. The watch still ticks and sometimes stops if I forget to wind it, the perfect metaphor for the way peace requires participation. If a stranger were to enter my living room today, they find nothing worth stealing that any pawn shop would price. But everywhere they looked, they'd see 1,000 unsellable riches. A glass with a water ring we haven't. Scrub it away. A scuff on the floor where the chair lay. Insists on memory. A photograph restored to its frame with a thumbprint that is mine. Not as much to be erased, but a claim to be recognized. And you who have listened to this story the way good. Neighbors, listen at the fence. Not to gossip, but to understand, know that what I wanted was never vengeance. It was proportion, not a roar. B. At a room set back in order, not a spectacle, but a standard. Peace isn't the absence of betrayal. It's the decision to face it without surrendering what makes your life yours. If I have anything to offer you after all this, it is a small set of permissions to verify without becoming suspicious of the whole world, to forgive without forgetting what the lock is for, to love your people, but make them earn their keys. Thank you for staying with me to the end, for your time, your attention, the gentle company of your imagination in my kitchen and on my porch. I wish you health that doesn't frighten you, a home that forgives you, your rituals, and a family that learns quickly how to tell the truth. If this story moved you, if it steadied you, if it made you look at why, our own thresholds with a little more wisdom and a little less fear, please subscribe so we can keep meeting here, where the light is honest and the coffee is warm. Until next time, take care of your rooms and they will take care of you.